Here to talk to us about this is a political and legal analyst, Vik Bajaj. Vik, so glad you're joining us this morning. Always great to see you.
Good morning,
Hi,
and thank
morning.
you so much. Yes.
Yeah, so you focus on, and you are an expert in federal laws. Your take on right now, we are in the middle of this partial government shutdown, now considered to be the longest we've had.
Yes, and it's, for me, there really is no surprise here. And this is because both sides, the proponents of the wall and the opponents of the wall, have drawn a very clear line in the sand early on during this ongoing debate. And so there really isn't a surprise. Government shutdowns are not personal. They are not vindictive. As you had mentioned earlier in the opening, President Clinton was at the helm of a big government shutdown for 21 days, which was the longest until this morning, back in 95 to 96, specifically about budgetary concerns and how the House had then been taken over by the Republicans, and there was a contract for America that was pushed through, attempted to be pushed through. That was to create a smaller government and reduce government funding. Well, that was not something President Clinton and his party wanted, so they declared a shutdown. So the fight over finances is something that we will see more routinely lead into a shutdown, of course, and there are other actions the president can take. But I think the president was well advised and extremely well spoken and intelligent when he said, I can do it, but it's not my job. Your representatives need to resolve this issue.
So he has said that he can declare an emergency legally and get the funds he needs. But he's also looking at other sources like money that might be there for the Army Corps of Engineers, or just we talked about disaster relief. But he said he doesn't want to do that. And one thing he said is the reason is he's afraid his administration is going to get sued. How might that play out?
Well, that's right. And you can bet there's going to be a lawsuit either way. There may be a lawsuit. There are already lawsuits from government employees who have been furloughed and not receiving their pay. They're suing the United States of America and the White House, essentially, for a policy decision. Lawsuits will come. We live in California. There are a lot of lawyers, so we're used to lawsuits making the news. Maybe the rest of the country really isn't, but you can bet your bottom dollar that the final touches to the opening requests for preliminary injunctions and emergency orders have already been penned. That's something that will be completed before any action is taken in a peremptory way. So yes, there will be challenges, but that challenge, in my opinion, is something that would come about no matter which side of the aisle one stood on. And that should not be an impediment or in any way something that should, push someone away from a policy he or she believes is right for the United States of America.
A couple of things I wanted to point out when we talk about seeing the effects. You talked about we're already starting to see lawsuits from federal employees who are suing the federal government over not getting paid. But we're also seeing seeing the effects at our national parks. We're seeing the effects at even our airports. Miami International Airport, as a matter of fact, this afternoon is going to be closing a concourse because they're going to be taking those TSA workers and they're going to be moving them in busier areas of the airport because either TSA workers are calling in sick or they're choosing not to show up.
Yeah, that's right. And we're going to see more and more of that. I mean, some of our beautiful places here in San Diego have been essentially off limits. Cabrillo Point, you can still go out there, but it's not kept as it used to be. Joshua Tree in California, we've seen trees that have been chopped down by vandals because of a lack of supervision. These are opportunity costs. If we look at it as a business decision, which is the way the government should look at most decisions when balancing the budget, for instance, this is an opportunity cost. This is something that pales in comparison to what the president believes is a policy that can save American lives. One does not need to go very far. We have some of the most beautiful courthouses in our wonderful city here in San Diego, a new state courthouse and a new federal courthouse. Both are open to the public, and I encourage our viewers to stop on by and see what types of cases are being prosecuted. That tells us a lot.
And speaking of that, you and I were talking off camera about changes that you've seen within the federal courtroom locally. Talk to us about that. Draw on your experience and share some of that insight with us.
Absolutely. And I have the pleasure of walking into federal court essentially every week here in San Diego and throughout the nation. So I will say that we see a different quality and character of a defendant. It used to be the case that it was a business decision again. Can an organization move a certain amount of narcotics with an opportunity cost of those being arrested arrested and prosecuted and potentially giving information on the larger drug trafficking organization. Is that opportunity cost worth paying for the larger benefit of moving high volumes of narcotics and therefore making more of a windfall? Well, the organizations have said in the past, yes, that's absolutely worth it. What we can see now is, in my experience after 2016, the federal government has taken a different stance on allegations, for instance, that could have been pled against prior defendants or defendants who were there prior to 2016 but weren't. For instance, some of those have prior narcotics offenses. Well, in federal court, this can increase your punishment to a minimum of 20 years. Now, we saw the previous administration exercise, some would argue, healthy discretion in saying, well, we're not going to file that allegation, even though the United States sentencing guidelines give us the authority to do that. Well, it's a different ballgame now. Since 2016, we can see that well-versed defense attorneys are well advised to have quicker dispositions and to be more compromising in the sense that there is a huge hammer at the end of the road if, for instance, cooperation and compliance with the timelines is not adhered to.
How would you advise the president? I mean, if you were his attorney, what would you tell him?
You know, it's funny you say that. I can't say my wife hasn't asked me that 100 times.
What would you tell him?
Once you draw a line in the sand, and this is for any negotiation, I believe, whether you're talking about saving American lives, making sure our kids are not addicted to narcotics and not used as mules. We now see 15, 16-year-old high school students here in the city of San Diego being recruited by the drug trafficking organizations to run the drugs. I would advise the president to do what you say. Once you say something in a negotiation, you lose face and credibility if you back off. Now, President Trump and his administration have not given any signs of backing off. As a matter of fact, they have said very politely, if you don't do what we want, we will exercise our authority, which, by the way, in 1976, Congress gave to the presidencies. So I would say do exactly what you say. It's very interesting to me, however, that if we concentrate on the facts and we look at what's happening in the federal courthouses and the state courthouses and the borders, you'd be hard-pressed to find one law enforcement officer or even an individual who's a defense attorney, like myself, say that strengthening our borders is not something that should be in the best interest of our community and our children. It should be. It should be the number one thing. Now, President Trump has made it clear he needs to follow through on that promise.
All right. Vik Bajaj, always great to have you and appreciate you coming in on a Saturday morning, Vik.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. You too.